Okay, so welcome on into the MO podcast. You're here with me, Consummatious Anne, and my lovely co-host.
Betrayer 300.
Today we are going to talk about Edmund Emil Kemper III. Murdered 10 people and has been in prison since the early 70s, 1974 I think it was. And yeah, we're just going to talk about the things he did, why we think he did them, and how much he has actually helped in the profiling business that the Robert Kessler of the FBI started setting up around this time, just to try and get a handle on serial killers and how and why they operated, and just to see if they could kind of catch them earlier. So, what would you like to start on this?
Sure, I can start.
Yeah, fire on then.
Okay, so we will say to start with, he didn't have the most picture-perfect upbringing. His dad left when he was really, really young. His parents actually got divorced when he was 9, and his mum I think she was just a bit of a battle axe, just in general, really. And she really, really hated men, like with a passion, you know. I kind of feel a bit sorry for her husband. I mean, he was actually quoted as well, which I thought was kind of funny. He said that suicide missions in wartime and atomic bomb testing were nothing compared to living with Clarnell. That was Ed's mum.
I read that quote as well. He was a kind of, maybe not special ops guy, but certainly during the Second World War he was behind enemy lines a lot. And he did fight in the war. He'd seen death firsthand, and he came out with that quote, can kind of tell you a little bit about how she was.
Yeah, she was a bit controlling, really. I get the impression she was very much kind of like the godfather of the family, like it was her way or the goddamn highway, and she did favour his sisters, quite clearly. She used to lock him in the basement, make him sleep in the basement, where he just basically had one bare bulb and a mattress on the floor, and he was terrified. They had one of those old, log burning stove things, and it used to make noises. He was only really, really young. He was terrified, the poor guy. I say the poor guy. Poor kid. He was terrified. And his mum had locked him down there because she was convinced he would sexually assault his sisters. I don't know where she got this idea from. It's a very bizarre thing to just assume your son would do.
Yeah, I know, because, I mean, from what I've read, limitedly, obviously, about her, I don't think she's not the kind of person to be sexually assaulted. And in some of the interviews Kemper has done, he kind of was there, and he's witnessed her try and egg men on to attack her or something, and they've all kind of backed down on it. So where she's got this idea of someone's gonna do that, never mind her own son, I don't know where's that come from.
And it wasn't the kind of thinking back at that time. You know, women were very house proud, they looked after the families, blah de blah. They were quite respected by men in a kind of tip your hat, good morning Mrs. Wilson sort of deal. They weren't being raped left, right and centre. It wasn't a massive thing for her to assume that that's what men did. They just went around raping just willy-nilly. It's not, I don't know why she would think that, and especially since she had such a massive control over Ed. Like, she had him under the thumb well and truly.
Yeah.
She had the poor guy and his dad terrified. And I mean, there was stories of when he was little about that he would cut the heads off his sister's Barbies, and that they should have. It was obvious that this is what was going to happen to him because of the things he did when he was little. However, I did actually watch an interview where he was talking about the thing with his sister's Barbie, and he said that he'd gone on holiday and he'd been given this air rifle, BB gun, and it was his pride and joy, and he loved it. And he thought his sister was a bit jealous of it because she didn't go on the holiday, she didn't get this cool present, and so she snatched it off him, lobbed it at him, hit him with it, which hurt. And if you stub your toe or something, your first reaction is, ah, and you get angry. And when he picked it up off the ground, it was bust. And this was, his thing. He didn't have very many toys. This was his pride and joy, and his sister had broke it. So he grabbed her Barbie, pulled its head off, and then thought afterwards, well, actually, she can just stick the head back on. The damage to my toy is permanent. So he cut the hands off.
Yeah, I saw that interview as well, and I've seen that, and that's. But bearing in mind, he's only what, 9 or 10 at this point. That's intricate thinking, because when he pulled the head off, obviously Barbie's head's come off and he can go back on. So he was already thinking about doing it more permanent damage.
Yeah. But do you kind of think that sort of screams, I'm going to be a serial killer when I grow up? Or do you think that's... Because to me, that just seemed like a child tantrum.
It's just retribution with siblings, isn't it? You've broke something of mine, so I'll break something of yours. I mean, obviously, doing it, having a permanent way of breaking it, he just took the scissors on with it. And maybe it was maybe he got glee from that, and maybe that's why he kind of led him on the path it led him on about dismembering, but...
It didn't seem like he hated his sister, though. Like, I mean, from what I've read and the interviews that I've seen, it seemed like they quite often played games together, and they mostly kind of got on, It didn't seem like he hated her. Maybe he had, like, little jealous frustration things because his mum favoured her over him, but I don't think it seemed like he hated her, per se. It was more like just an ordinary sibling rivalry.
No, and later on, when he was in prison, she visited him. She was one of the main visitors, and he did lose. I mean, I'll talk about it in a bit, but he did lose his visiting rights, and it was his sister, Patricia, who was his younger sister, that was. He had to ring her and tell her, "I've lost my visiting rights, so don't bother coming up for 6 months." Although she did, I think at all of his parole hearings, she did stand up and say you should never release him because he's a bad man.
Yeah,
but I don't think there was any hatred other than the hatred he had to all women against her.
Yeah, his mum definitely instilled a hatred.
God, yeah.
I mean, a hatred for women, but only in the sense that he just sees every woman as his mother.
Yeah.
I mean, the girls that he killed, generally, I think he was just using them as kind of like a proxy, like a stand-in, as a run-up to the main event. Boss fight, yeah.
Yeah, the main boss fight, love it,
basically, yeah. So he was just like, testing and trialing. I mean, he allegedly picked up hundreds of hitchhikers building up to this process of kidnapping somebody, and he would keep doing a little bit more every time. Like, he started carrying a gun around in the glove box, and then he would take the gun out, and eventually it got to the stage where he was kidnapping and killing these girls because the girls represented everything his mother loved. They went to the university where his mother worked, and she loved her job, and these girls basically represented something of hers that she loved that he could destroy. They symbolised something he could destroy for her.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. It like you say, they were just standing proxies just for him to build up to this the final boss fight, as he said. Yeah,
but it did. I mean, as you said before, when he killed 10 people, he started off. He went looking for his dad, and his dad basically sent him to live with his grandparents. And his grandmother was, battle axe must run in the family. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. She was a proper right one as well. And I think she kind of made his life hell. And he was a 15, and she was, yelling at him. And he just took a shotgun and just shot her dead. And his granddad was out at the time, and he was concerned that he didn't want his granddad to come back and have to go through the trauma of seeing his wife dead. So he waited till his granddad came in, and he shot him dead as well.
Yeah, I think that as well with his granddad. I think he kind of put, because it was his mother and his father, if you know what I mean. So his grandmother was his mother, and his granddad was his father. So he didn't want to disappoint him, to find out that he'd done this terrible thing and to have the shame and disappointment of it. I mean, as much as he said he didn't want his granddad, like, they've been married 50 odd years, he didn't want him walking in and seeing his wife of 50 years dead. I think he kind of portrayed him as his father in this kind of dry run.
Yeah.
And he didn't want the disappointment, the shame that he knew was going to come from his from actually seeing this happen. So he kind of just snuffed him out when he had the chance.
And then called his mum to let her know what he'd done.
Yeah, always going back to the mother as well. It's like he's definitely got mummy issues.
100%. And she just told him, ring the police. Like, I wish I could hear that phone call. Like, I wonder if it was like, oh my God, you did what? You killed my parents? How could you? Oh, I hate you. I knew this was going to happen. Or kind of, oh, God's sake, Edmund, would you just ring the police? Yeah.
Just a sigh.
Like, I feel like she was...
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, again, you've done it. Oh, bloody hell. Like the cat's all over again.
Burying the cat alive. Harsh.
But I know. And then that with the cats, it was. I genuinely. So he said, because he killed two of his family's cats, and the cat was showing more affection to his sisters rather than him, and this was one of the reasons why he did it. But again, he decapitated it, and he kept the head for a while and kept it in his closet until his mum found it. Which I mean, and then you just pass that off if you're the mother, because obviously he was under 15, because that's the time that he killed his grandparents, so he was still living at home when he did this. So it's between the ages of 9 and 15 that he did this, and his mother found a decapitated cat head in his closet and just went, "Don't do it again, Edmund."
Basically, yeah.
Rather than going, right, maybe we have to look at it. Fair enough, it was the 60s, 70s, it was a different time than it is now, but still, it's warning signs, surely.
Definitely. I mean, I read somewhere that cats actually symbolise, they're symbolic of females, so that's why a lot of serial killers who go on to, murder cats beforehand, they symbolise women.
Oh, is that the reason? Wow.
Apparently.
I never realised that, because like the McDonald's triad, which is like the 3 factors that they looked at. Famous, like, well, maybe famous to probably you and me, but if you're outside of this serial killer circle, maybe you don't know it. But it was not an experiment, but it was a study that was done of a lot of serial killers, sexual predators in the time, and there was 3 factors that they drew from this. That it was animal cruelty, and it was particularly cats, but I never knew it was, because it makes a lot more sense now, because it was sexual predators, violent sexual prisoners that they interviewed about this. So the cats make a lot more sense. It was fire setting, and it was bedwetting. So 3 of them 3, if you do them 3, and if anyone out there does them 3, get help. You're going down a wrong path already. But interestingly, the actual guy that came up with this, McDonald, he didn't actually believe that it was a definitive link with them behaviours and adult violence. But out of 88 people that they interviewed for this, who were convicted of violent acts or murder, 31 of them had the full triad. So that is actually pretty good going, and 57 of them only had 1 or 2 of them. They didn't have the full triad. But it's interesting that each one of them people that were convicted had one of these behaviours. So rather than no one having any of them, like, there wasn't just one person that they interviewed and they went, oh no, he doesn't have anything, maybe he's just a freak. They all had one of them.
Yeah.
But as well, what was a major part of it was abuse, rejection, and neglect in the family or in peers as well. But that wasn't looked into because they've already got the results they needed, so they didn't really need to push that. But yeah, I never realised it was a female. Does that probably come from Egypt, doesn't it?
I mean, I don't know. I kind of just assumed that cats always got it because they were, easier targets. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
go
could
after
try
a
and
dog,
kill an
it's gonna bite
Alsatian
you.
if you want, exactly, but it's not going to end well, is it? Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's how I read into it. But the keeping the heads thing, apparently growing up, they kept chickens. The family kept chickens, and he gave them all names, and he kind of thought of them as pets. But his mum and dad were just going to, kill them and eat them. And so that's exactly what they did. And his mum forced him to watch while his dad cut the chickens' heads off, basically cut the heads off his beloved pets. And then she served them up and made him eat them for tea. So he did say that was where the head thing came in. But, he just embellishes so much and fabricates so much. It could just be he's trying to make people think that there was a logical reason behind it as opposed to he's just nuts.
So after he killed his grandparents and he obviously he went to... He should have really gone to jail, but it's the 60s and no one really knows that much, I suppose, back then. But he went to...
He was a juvenile as well, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. So he was 15 years old when he did this. And he went to, rather than go, he was in a youth program, I think, but then he was transferred over to I don't want to say asylum, but it was a mental hospital, basically, called Atascaro, which is in California. And why I don't understand why they actually let him have as much of a free reign as he did. I think it's because he's so genial. When you watch, even at 15, when you watch the interviews of him, he's very forthcoming. He seems very helpful.
Definitely.
He's just a bit. You look at him and he's 6'9", I believe.
Oh, he's a monster.
Yeah, so 250 pounds. He's a big gentle giant.
Yeah. When you look at him, you don't expect him to be so kind of nice.
No, exactly.
You're taken aback, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think that's what kind of played into his height was a major issue for him, because when he was a kid, he had a really weird fear that other kids were going to beat him up. When he was, I think he was 6'4" when he was 15.
Blimey.
So where that came from, no idea. But he had this fear that he was going to get beaten up, so he kind of retracted into himself. But when he went to this mental hospital, he was working in the psychiatric unit. He was helping psychologists with their tests. So basically, he would administer tests to rapists and killers that had come in. And all he did was listen and take notes and go, well, that's a good idea. Didn't think of
That's
that.
the right answer. Answer A for when they ask me.
Yeah, this is it. He just used it to his own advantage. And this is where he got tested and for his IQ, and he came out at 100. He came out at 130, I think, first time. Then they did it again, or later on, and it was 145. So to put that into perspective, Einstein was tested and he had an IQ of 160.
So he was verging on absolute genius.
So yeah, see, I've always said this, and clever people should be locked up. Right, if you've got an IQ of over 130, what they should do is just go, yeah, right, you say they're 15 and they've scored an IQ, you should have IQ test at 15, 130 or over, they go to Oxford. But as soon as they walk in, you lock the door and throw the key away. And
Is this
just pretend.
like your Minority Report?
Indeed.
Is this how you're going to do it?
It's like in Discworld, there's Leonard Quirm. and the patrician just keeps him locked in a room and he don't mind it. I'm sure they wouldn't mind, really. They're too busy curing, well, not cancer, but they're making maths and stuff. A beautiful mind, isn't it? But I don't think he was aware of his IQ, and I don't think it played that big a part in what he did and how he did. I think learning from the rapists and the murderers that he interviewed, I think that's where he kind of got his edge from. Because obviously IQ isn't knowledge. It's just being able to keep that knowledge inside and know what the knowledge means. So I think this is where it all went downhill. If maybe he would have been incarcerated and maybe rehabilitated, because they weren't working on rehabilitation, they were just working on getting him better in a way of... Well, I don't know what they were doing with him, because I think he was out after a couple of years. He only spent a few years in there.
Yeah, they seem to think he was perfectly fine, which I guess at the time, like, you would think, like, Ted Bundy now, and you would think, oh, these people that... I mean, Ted Bundy had the whole court laughing, and they all thought he was charming, because that's a serial killer trait. They are charming, they do take you aback, and you can't get over the fact that these people who are supposedly such huge monsters are actually so nice and polite and kind of kind, you know. And so at that time they didn't know that this was a trait at all, so I guess they just thought, I'm not really sure why he's even in here. Maybe he just had a bad day, because this kid is really nice. He's very helpful. He helps us with all the mental patients.
Yeah, exactly. They could have just thought he had one bad day. How often's that going to happen?
Yeah, and then they let him go.
And then they just let him go. In fairness, they did let him go with the proviso of that he should not be living with his mum.
Yes.
And he should have as little to do with his mother as possible. But obviously, when you just come out of the nut house, you don't have many... I shouldn't say that, but when you come out of a mental institute, you don't have many places, opportunities to go. So he ended right back up living with his mum again.
Yeah. And, you know, it was never going to work out. He clearly hated her. He actually requested that he didn't go back to live with her. And yeah, she would beat him down constantly. She would tell him he was useless, he was never going to amount to anything. And I think as he got older, this made him more and more socially inept, which just made him more and more frustrated that he couldn't talk to girls and stuff. He did say he went on one date and it just was awful, not because of the girl was lovely, but he was just a shambles. He just didn't know what to do, how to act. I think that kind of he called himself emotionally impotent. So I think that was starting to build on the violence. But he also said he spent a lot of time watching crime TV shows to get ideas. And you wouldn't think that would work. You know, you always see the tongue-in-cheek things and you're like, yeah, Mulder and Scully had it wrong, or CSI, yeah, that would never wash in real life. But clearly it did.
Yeah. I mean, as well, he... Even during this period of time as well, he tried to join the police force as well after he was released, but he was rejected because he was too tall. And as well, I think that kind of played into his feelings of rejection for his size, and he was very upset about that. But he did hang around at a cop bar, and talk to them a lot, and maybe gain some insights from them.
Definitely, yeah. He said he was a bit of a nuisance to them, but in a good way, a positive nuisance. You would think that they would want a guy who was 6'9" on the force.
Indeed, but they've got you can't height restrictions, so you can't be too small or too tall. I think they've got rid of that now. Certainly, I think with being too tall, but at that time, both the two ones that he could have applied to, the two jurisdictions he could have applied to, had a maximum height. But you'd be begging for it nowadays, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, that's nuts. Look at Jackie Chan, he's titch. But you wouldn't want to meet him in a back alley on a pissed off day.
Exactly.
It just doesn't make sense to me. it's a bit strange. So, okay, so maybe we should go on to the murders then.
Yeah, I mean, so now he's basically set adrift. He's let go. He's what, 19 or something at the time that he left. He tried to integrate into society. He had jobs with the California State Highway, I think, if memory serves, and he was out working on the roads. I also think he actually said in the 2017 parole hearing that he was living on the edge there because cars were zipping past him at 70 miles an hour, and he was working in the middle of the highway kind of thing, and if one of them would clip him, that'd be it. It'd be all over for him. He also, I can't remember what other jobs he did, but he had a fair few. He worked at a gas station. So he did try and integrate with society, but every time he started getting up, something would come along and knock him down, and he ended up, he was living with people, he had, quote marks, friends, but then he ended up back living with his mum. And like you said, his mum worked on the university campus in California, and she had a little sticker on her car, which was like a parking sticker kind of thing. So anyone that saw that knew it was affiliated with a particular university, which probably get into later, but this is the reason why he got so many people in his car, because, work at the university, you can be trusted around young people, I'll get a lift.
And he looked like the kind of guy that you wouldn't expect to be a serial killer. He looked kind of like your average boy next door sort of deal. The nerdy one, you know.
Yeah, no, completely unassuming. You just, yeah, like literally, even when you walk, you see pictures of him. Even when he's like going to court and he's in the shackles and everything, and he's a head higher than everyone else, all you just think is he must be a gentle giant kind of thing. You can't ascribe any violence to him, but obviously.
I read somewhere that he used to fantasize about being the last person on Earth. He read this book when he was young about being the last person on Earth, kind of like I Am Legend, but without the zombies. And he thought that would be a really cool thing, to just be the last person on Earth. I mean, some days, yeah, you kind of do feel like that, like, oh, God, get me away from people. But then he kind of thought about it again after reading the book, and he thought, actually, this is probably going to be pretty lonely being on my own. And then he started to see people as inanimate objects, not as people anymore. They just ceased to be a human being to him.
Yeah. I mean, you can see the clear detachment, just the way with what he did. I mean, his first victims after his grandparents were Marianne Pesci and Anita Lucchese. So these were both students at the Fresno College. And literally, as he'd done 100 times before, he was picking up hitchhikers. These two girls were together. He picked them up and basically took them to a secluded spot, pulled out a gun, locked, I think Anita in the boot.
Yeah.
And then basically, I think out of this, what he wanted to do, from what I've read, was to have a relationship with them. I mean, I don't know where he thought he was going with it, but I think he was gonna basically he proposed that, and when you propose it at gunpoint, it's not as romantic as you think.
You're not my type.
Yeah, so I think what he alluded to in an interview, or it may have been the parole hearing that I was reading, what basically he alluded to is he wanted to have sex with these two girls because they were so beautiful that he thought, but they started fighting back and saying no, it's not going to happen, and he kind of got upset, and he actually stabbed them both to death. He had Mary Ann in the back seat. I think she was handcuffed, and he stabbed her. And then he opened the boot and stabbed Anita. He decapitated both of them, and he was very firm about this because in the 2017 parole hearing, the judge was saying to him, or the commissioner was saying to him, that he dismembered them, and he was no, I didn't. I just cut their head off.
Like,
I mean,
not
like,
quite as bad.
Exactly. I mean, obviously, for him, it's semantics and it matters. Mm-hmm. Don't know why, but obviously he decapitated them, so there's no point in asking questions to someone that goes around decapitating people. He engaged in sexual acts with them, with the decapitated heads. Yeah, it actually has a name, and it's called I probably can't say it, but it's Mateo. And it's actually a Roman thing that was done to Roman gladiators to humiliate them.
Oh, charming. Can always rely on the Romans.
Indeed. I mean, the Greeks invented buggery, but the Romans perfected it, didn't they? So, yeah.
Speaking of ancient Romans and Greeks and stuff, he actually tried to validate cutting the heads off the girls and making it seem like it wasn't, like it was kind of a normal thing by saying, well, you know, back in the Viking Age, when a man would go into war, he would cut the heads off his enemies and then he would bring them back to the mead hall and everyone would have a beer around them, this, severed head in a bag. It was totally normal back then. Like, we haven't progressed since the Vikings.
Yeah, wow, that's, yeah. He did say that as a kid, he was told something, and it was basically, if you cut the head off, the body dies. So that's why he did it, because without the head, the body's nothing. That's where the brain's stored. That's where the eyes are stored. All the sensual feel, eyes, ears, mouth, nose. That's why he was obsessed with heads rather than any other body part. But yeah, unfortunately,
I guess it's a way of possessing the person as well.
Exactly. That is also what he said. They became possessions to him, and this is why he kept heads. Yeah. So he disposed of the bodies. Anita was never found, but Mary Ann's head washed up on a beach a few days later after this, and when he was arrested, he actually took them to where he buried or threw Mary Ann off the cliff. But yeah, it was them were his first two.
He couldn't have kept the heads for very long though, presumably, because I mean, would you really want to have sex with a decomposed? I mean, you wouldn't want to have sex with a non-decomposing head, but would you? It's not quite as.
I mean, yeah,
The smell alone would be...
Yeah, apparently I think 3 days, from what I read, is as long as he kept them in and around his person. That's to say, he had one in a cupboard for 3 days.
God.
And he did do a newspaper interview just before he was convicted. And he said to the interviewer, "You're not asking, like, normal questions that you'd ask a serial killer." And she was very taken aback. She said, like, what do you mean? And, quote, he said, "Well, you're not asking what it's like to have two decapitated heads, one on each end of the sofa."
Ugh.
So, yeah. To be fair, he did answer his own question. He said, it made me sick to my stomach the first time. I don't know what the second time was, but...
Yeah, then it's recorded that he would hold them and talk to them, so he can't have been that repulsed.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was just that first time he went, oh, this may be a bit wrong. And then he kind of got used to it. Who knows? But yeah, and then his next victim was Aiko Ku, who was a 15-year-old high school student. Now, Kemper himself has said if he would have known she was 15, he wouldn't have killed her. But I don't know whether that's him just trying to be, oh, I didn't mean to, kind of thing, or whatever. But
I've seen pictures of her. She does look fairly young.
yeah, the reason why he got confused is because she was on a university campus and she was trying to hitch a lift from there. That's apparently what he said. During this encounter, he actually pulled out a gun and said, rather than he was going to kill her, he was going to kill himself. So that's the reason why he drove to a secluded spot. Proceeded to get out the car and then locked himself out. Somehow, I don't know why. If he didn't have a gun, if he wouldn't have pulled the gun, I would have believed. Like, I could honestly see this 100%. But somehow he managed to charm Ku to open the door of the car and let him back in. I mean, if he wouldn't have pulled the gun and just gone, "Oh, I'm just going to go for a think," then yeah. But he must be I mean, they've seen his interviews and he is a charming person. But wow, and I suppose she is a bit young and naive, but.
And I guess at that time as well, because he had perfected the hitchhiking method thing. He would see a couple of hitchhikers on the side of the road, and then he would kind of look at his watch and act all like, oh, fine, I'll pick them up, but I'm gonna be late, kind of deal, like he was doing them a favor. And then he would stick he when they got in, he would say, "Oh, I think your door's not shut properly," and he would reach over them and drop a chapstick down the side of the door, which would wedge it closed. So even if they realised, "Oh shit, what's going on?" they couldn't open the door anyway. It would jam it shut. So I'm not quite sure. I mean, maybe she opened the door from his side, but if she'd have tried to open it from her side, surely she would have known something's not quite right. My door's not opening. Did they have child locks in the 70s? I doubt it.
I doubt it. Do you have seatbelts?
Exactly. So that should have been a bit of a warning sign.
Yeah. Yeah. It's he's like you say, he's done this hundreds of times, so he's probably gone over every scenario in his head. He's a clever guy. I mean, all right, I'm not going to big up the 70s cop shows, but he's watched cop shows. He's learned, he's interviewed dangerous criminals, he's learned from them. So it's not unbelievable, but it's just if she would have... I mean, to be honest with you, he had a gun and he was going to kill her anyway, so he would have got in the car one way or the other.
Yeah, this is true.
It's just such a shame. But then he suffocated her, and after she was dead, he had his way with her. And the horrible thing about this is he put her in the boot and then went for a couple of drinks. Just like you do.
Probably in the bar where all the cops were.
Exactly, and then walks out and opens the boot and looks down on her and, quote, looking at her like a fisherman looks at his catch. Just like, right, okay.
It's not even any remorse or anything.
No,
go on.
No, go on.
Even though he said he suffocated her because he didn't want her to suffer, because he thought that suffocation was painless, that you would just pass out and blah-de-blah. He didn't realise, actually, it takes quite a while to die and it is quite traumatic. And then he said he felt bad afterwards, but I really doubt that.
No, he didn't even do it right the first time. He did it, and then she woke up because he didn't keep his hand on her, so the next time, like, it kind of scared him, and he just held her there for minutes. But as well, he beheaded her and visited his court-appointed attorney 2 days later, and he had her head in the trunk of the car. Yeah, I know. I read that and went, really, wow. And that's from I think that's from the parole board hearing where I got that information from. So.
I know he said he walked past a couple who lived in his flat block with one of the girls' heads in her music bag.
Yeah. I think I think it possibly was coup because she was a dancer, so and he kept that head for a couple of days. But yeah, I know. And then he moved on to Cindy Shael. This all happened over a period of 18 months, I think. Uh, and all in fairness, well, not in fairness, but there was another serial killer in going on at this time. My mind has gone in Santa Cruz, which is where all this takes place. So Henry Mullins was a serial killer, operating at the same time as Kemper. So they weren't turning up, but there was a lot of missing people going away, going from especially young girls, high school, colleges. They'd go out and party and not speak to someone for a couple of days. So it kind of fell through the cracks quite a lot of these people going missing. But his next victim was Cindy Schall. She was 18. He bought a 22.22 gun now, and he started to, because he wanted it to be quicker. I just think he enjoyed using a gun. He was quite experienced with a gun. Obviously, he killed his grandparents with a gun. He went hunting with a gun. I just think it was more comfortable and easier to use for him. He actually took her body back to his mother's house where he was staying at the time and kept it in a closet until she left for work the next day. And then as soon as the keys hit the lock, he got her out and had his way with her. He actually cut her up and took the bullet out of her head, so there'd be no evidence linking him back. And he did the same thing that then Crazy Romans did to her, and he buried the head in the back garden, looking up at his mother's room, because she always had someone. No, because she always looked down on people. His mother.
Yeah. What a bitch.
Yeah, indeed. It's just oof.
If only she'd known. Maybe she would have been nicer.
I know. Yeah, this is just be nice to your kids, people. Like,
yeah.
You never know what they're gonna do.
It's nurture, not nature, definitely.
Yeah, definitely, without a shadow of a doubt. Oof. So that was Cindy, and then there was these last two student murders were Rosalind Thorpe and Alison Liu. They were 23. Rosalind was 23. Alison Liu was 20. They were UCS students. The thing about this is he picked up Rosalind first, and as he was driving to, quote marks, her destination, he pulled over to pick up Alison, and because Rosalind was in the car, she kind of said something along the lines of, "No, it's alright, it's cool." And that's the reason why she got in. She was a bit apprehensive at first. Unfortunately, Rosalind was in the front seat, and they were driving, he pointed out the view and said, "Oh, look at the view there." Pulled out the gun, shot her in the back of the head, and then turned round, and I don't know if he blind fired, but I think he shot a good couple of bullets into Alison in the back seat. Then he drove to his mother's house with I don't know how the bodies were, but they were certainly in the car, and literally on the drive he beheaded them.
Cocky.
Yeah, just yeah. So he brought the bodies in again, kept them in the closet, had his way with them. Again, he removed the bullet from Rosalind's head. I don't know what he did with Alison, but yeah, and then he disposed of the bodies.
Is that a bit pointless, removing the bullet when your DNA is covered all over her?
I mean, to be honest with you, this was, I'm going to say this is before DNA. Yeah, to be honest with you, I really don't think they would have had much luck with the bullet. But he was just a stickler. Maybe he'd seen it on a cop show, this bullet matches that gun. and he was just like, well, I've took her head off anyway, I may as well cut it up a bit more.
Logical.
It's
Yeah.
no odds to him, is it, now at this point?
Yeah.
But yeah, and that brings us on to his mother. Do you want to talk about that?
The boss fight.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, so he said he knew all along, and he knew that night he was going to kill his mother when he walked in. She was reading in bed. He walked into her room, and she said, and this really irritated him, apparently, she looked at him and she said, "Oh, I suppose you want to sit up all night and talk now." And he just said goodnight, and he turned around and he walked away. And he was actually crying in the interview when he was like relaying this as well. And he said he knew he was going to kill her, and he waited till she fell asleep, and they took a hammer, and he killed her, and he cut her head off. And he ripped out her vocal cords. He put them in the food disposal weary thing in the sink that all Americans have that British people don't for some reason. And because that was his way of symbolising that'll shut you up once and for all. And then he had sex with her head. And and then he put it on the mantelpiece, and he threw darts at it. And he said that this was his way of humiliating her corpse, like she humiliated him all those years. This was his payback, humiliating her. And then a week after, he stopped for another 2 hitchhikers, and he let them go. He decided, no, it's got to stop, and he rang the police, and he turned himself in. He said, "I've killed my mother. Hey, come and arrest me." He was actually quoted as saying that he requested the death sentence, and he requested death by torture. And they were like, that's not in our...
Yeah, I saw that.
Not in the States, sweetheart.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you don't know, he's a bit lost upstairs. I mean, I think that just puts the nail on the head there, really, doesn't it? It's like death by torture.
Yeah. What kind of torture do you think he would have... Like, maybe he's having his head slowly cut off while somebody has sex with it. Would that be poetic justice?
I don't know of all the tortures that are... I mean, I'm not a big, mad fan of torture. I'm not up to date on all of them. But I'm sure there's lots of ways you can go. But, no. He is a very, very strange person. But as well, like, he's been in prison since 1974, so it's 40, going on 50 years now. But he still shows no remorse. He can't explain as to why he actually did it. Okay, I can kind of get that if it's kind of psychological, but the answers that he kept giving in the parole hearing that I've read, he was basically blaming his mother, having no kind of he wasn't owning it, he wasn't remorseful about it, he wasn't saying, yes, I did these things, this is the thing I did. And as well, he just seemed so naive. There was they asked him about what his parole plans were, where he was going to live, and he actually said, well, I've been invited to live in my old house, my mum's house. A bunch of guys live there now, and they wrote to me and said I could live there. And literally the commissioner just went, really? That's your plan? You're going back to the with a load of random strangers you're going to move in with as a 70-year-old man, and they're 30-odd, and
Creepy.
you're going to go and live in your old house where you committed these crimes. He's just got no awareness. There's nothing...
Or maybe it's a way of him to relive the crimes. Maybe it sounded like a good idea to him, like, oh, because he loves talking about the crimes. He'll talk about the crimes till the cows come home. He is, and in such graphic detail, and so blasé, like it was a science experiment he was doing.
Yeah. That's it as well. That's it with the parole hearing. It's he wants to get to the end of the story. Like there's so many questions that are asked him, and he just meanders through it and tells his the way he wants, and he doesn't like being told no, answer the question or we'll move on. He just wants to get it out, which is kind of it's a little bit like I don't know enough, but it's kind of like an autistic person that they have to get out what they need to say before moving on. But he's just either he's very naive or he's very clever at showing that he's naive. Do you know what I mean? He's kind of playing a game.
Yeah. Well, he understands psychology so very well, it's possible that that's entirely true, and that he's playing the interviewer and telling them what he thinks they want to hear, because dealing with all the patients when he was institutionalized, I mean, he had paranoid schizophrenia, so he probably was told all these things about his own condition and stuff. He understands psychology pretty damn well, so it's entirely possible he's being manipulative, especially since in the interviews, in the 1984 interview, he claimed that the girls were dead because of how his mother treated him and how she raised him, and it was her fault. He put all the blame on his mother. But then, by 1991, he said, I can't blame my mother. She was just trying to make the best of a bad situation. She was trying to raise us as best she could, and we weren't making it easy for her. It was my fault that the girls died, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, I know there's quite a few years between that for him to kind of reflect on it, but it just seems like he's just changing his story to fit who's interviewing him at the time.
Of course, and as well in the parole hearing, he's right back to the no, it's my mother. It's I didn't have anything to do with it. It was how I was raised. He takes no responsibility for it at all. He's just a very clever, manipulative person, and he did horrible things.
And then he claimed to find God in jail as well. He did the whole... And, do you know, I watched the interview and I couldn't help but think he was doing it in jest. He was given this interview and it was so tongue-in-cheek. It was like he was taking the piss out of the interviewers and they didn't even know it. About how he found God and he needs Jesus in his life and all this kind of stuff. And you could see in his face, he didn't believe it at all. He was just making a joke that everyone else in the room got, except for the people that were interviewing him.
Yeah. I don't think I've seen that one, but in the interviews that I have read, like even Kessler and the one just before he was sent down for life, they've said that there was one point in the whole interview where he just changed, and he kind of turned around and said something like, I could break your neck if I wanted to. And
Yes.
He showed his kind of true colours at just at one point. But most of them that came out, like, I think all the interviews that have come out have gone, he's quite likeable.
Yeah.
But he's still got that, I could do this if I wanted to. And it's that being powerful, isn't it? He just wants to one-up everyone and...
Yeah, he wants to make sure everybody knows what he's capable of, and they are only still alive because of his choosing.
He wills it. He wills. God complex, innit, kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And, speaking of complexes, he clearly had some sort of Freudian, like, as you say, mother issues.
God, Oedipal, yeah, Jesus. Yeah, he was...
Yeah.
As well, what he said was something I came across, that he actually had relationships with his mother's friends.
Oof.
Yeah, one of them he actually banged, and his mother, like, she found out, or a friend told her, and she came in and said, I can't even have none of my friends around here anymore because of you and that thing. And then locked him in his room. So I can see how he's got them complexes.
But if you were Clarnell's friend and you knew how like how she was, would you even tell her? What, like, was her friend suicidal?
I don't know. That's the thing as well. It could just be something he's saying, because I think truly, I don't really want to say it, but I think he's very sexually naive. I don't even know if he's ever popped his cherry or anything. But
Yeah.
it because that is where all this stems from. He can't be around women
Yeah.
that are alive. Plain and simple, really. He just and it is a big frustration for him, and that's how he kind of reacts. But yeah, I don't know how much truth there is in that, but he did say in the parole interview that he did have relations with some of his mum's friends.
Do you think maybe that was a way of getting back at her as well?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. Without a shadow of a doubt. Because he was saying, like, they were 50... They were at least 30 years older than him. And he was just a 20-year-old kid. So maybe he saw his mother in them, in the age and stuff, and had some kind of Oedipal fantasy about that.
What's your thoughts about the games that he used to play with his sister that everybody was freaked out about, the gas chamber game and...
I don't know. I mean, that is just... Alright, it's not normal behaviour. But it's not... I wouldn't assume anything like... I'd put more value against killing the cat.
Yeah.
Rather than having them games, because that's kind of self-harm, and that's pulling it inwards to yourself rather than outwards. But it's still a game of death. What was it? Gas chamber and electric chair?
Yeah, and they used to take turns rolling up in a rug and then see who could get out the quickest. And I think that's kind of normal. I don't even think that's... I think that's psychologists grasping at straws.
Yeah, I wouldn't put any value into that. I mean, I just think it's like, who hasn't pretended to be electrocuted when they were young? You know what I mean? Rolling your head and going, ugh.
Yeah, I mean, I remember duct taping my sister to a computer chair and leaving her there for hours once, like when we were little, you know, like just because I could, because I was a big sister and she was annoying me. So I was like, hey, sit in this computer chair and try and get out. And I duct taped her in. I mean, I wasn't in a sex dungeon or anything like that. We were just in our room, and you know, I was downstairs watching TV, my parents were in the kitchen or whatever. And yes, I got the hiding of a lifetime for it when my mum came up and found her, cried her eyes out. But we were kids.
You heard it here first. That's all I'm going to say on that one. I
don't wet the bed. I don't fit the profile.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, you couldn't kill bugs if you tried. Jesus.
Couldn't.
But no, yeah, I think they're just kids' games that you play. I don't think there's anything like, if you stack them up, the cat and the maybe not cutting the hands off, but it'll go with the cat, the cutting the hands off, and then the games in that kind of order. Do you know what I mean? Like, of going, but yeah. He didn't have many friends. Well, obviously, when he was growing up, no wonder.
Well, he said he felt...
see me dead cat.
He said he felt cast out by society, but it just doesn't seem to me like, with the relationship he had with his sister, it just doesn't seem to me like he really found it that difficult to get on with people.
I just think he wanted people to be against him. It was his own awkwardness. Like, his height was a major factor. He kind of withdrew into himself.
Yeah.
Because he had this thought that he was going to get attacked by other kids in the neighbourhood. He said, it's you either get these, when guys like me rock up, you get two kind of personalities, and one is the gentle giant, or one is the all in your face kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he was the latter, but he could have been the other way. He decided to take that on. He wasn't pushed into it. He just had this weird fear that, because I don't think there's much documented of him actually being bullied.
No.
He just had it in his head that he was gonna get bullied just because.
It was the paranoia, wasn't it? Definitely.
Exactly, yeah, and I think that played a major part in it. I mean, obviously, if you like seen a picture of him when he was 4 years old, and he's big. He's like 4 foot, which obviously it going to be self-conscious about, especially if you've got an overbearing mum who turns around to you and says, no one will ever love you, or you're too big. And if he's growing that fast, he's growing out of clothes, and therefore that's going to be like his mum's going to be pissed off because she's spending more money.
Or she's making him wear clothes 2 sizes too small or 10 sizes too small.
Yeah, which again, you're going to get bullied for, so you kind of go back into yourself.
But you see that with tall people anyway. Tall people tend to, well, I mean, a lot of tall people I know tend to do kind of stoop and slouch down because they are conscious of the fact that they're taller than everybody else, so they try and make themselves smaller. But they don't, go and decapitate people afterwards. They just kind of deal with it, and you just come into yourself afterwards, don't you?
Yeah, it's... He had issues before his mother started, I think, and...
Yeah.
It's definitely mummy issues and daddy issues, to be honest with you, because his dad left and he wanted to have his dad. I mean, at the end of the day, his dad was like a war hero to him, and then he just turned his back. And then when he went to go and try and live with his father, it upset his stepmom. He, just being around, upset his stepmom, so he was shipped off to the parents. So it's just one kind of rejection after the other, and overbearing mother. I can see, when you look at it, you go, yeah, you can see how it happened. It's textbook.
Yeah.
But it's just so easy to kind of, if you look at it and go, right, you could have stopped it there. You could have stopped it there. You could have stopped it there. No, no one bothered to try and stop it and try and go, let's try and get a handle on him. And from family to the authority figures, I think it's just
it's an unfortunate he was let down by the system, definitely.
Yeah.
He probably would have been getting some sort of help. Nowadays, it wouldn't have. I don't think it would have ever got to that stage, to be honest.
No, without a shadow of a doubt, he would have been I think he would have been in. At 15 years old, he would have been in juvie, and they would have gone, no, you're not getting out until you are better. They would just put him in Borstal or something. But it's no excuse. It's no excuse for what he did. I think he was the architect of his own. He knew exactly what he was doing when he was doing it, and he did it as a power trip.
Yeah.
And as he himself, he said he didn't. In the 80s, he said he didn't want any more parole hearings because it would. He's never gonna get he's never gonna get out, and B, what's he gonna do if he gets out?
Yeah, he's quite adapted now to prison life, I think, and a lot of people do struggle to adjust after they've been in prison for a long time to what we would class as normality.
Of course. I mean, he said when he went in the first time after he killed his grandparents, he said when he got out, it was a different world. People were looking different, they were speaking different, and that was what, after 4 or 5 years? Never mind after 50 years. It worked.
And that has to be hard in itself, even if you, if you were in hospital in a coma or something for 4 years, like something not, you weren't in jail or whatever. Even that, it's got to be scary. It's like waking up in a different time zone. Of
course, because you've not gone through the differences. You've not gone and seen that happening in front of you. You just woke up. He's good where he is.
Yeah, and I think he quite enjoyed reading all those books for the blind.
Yeah, exactly. He's done stuff in there that he wouldn't have done on the outside. I think he's lived a life in prison that he wouldn't have been able to live on the outside. Obviously, because he'd just be killing everyone every 2 minutes. But he's actually found use for his IQ
and we found use for him with
Indeed. But goddamn, that flower's in the attic.
But we've he has helped profiling. He basically was the reason that it ever came about, really.
That's the thing as well. I mean, obviously they interviewed a lot more than just him. but I wonder how honest he was with them. I mean, I did read an article that I think Kessler said that he was very forthcoming as soon as he realised that they were there for the reason they were there, rather than like to get dirt on him and find out. They just explained, look, we're looking at future serial killers. If we can just have a frank discussion with you, then it may help us. And apparently he was very forthcoming with it, but I wonder if he was 100% or if he still kept something back.
I kind of feel like maybe he wasn't telling it. He wanted people to think he was telling it from his perspective, but I think maybe he just understood the psychology behind the criminal mind a lot more than he might have let on. And I think because he was pretty cock on with a lot of the profiling, you know, you need to be looking for a guy who lives alone or blah blah, and he was pretty specific and he was pretty cock on with the profiling. So I feel like maybe it wasn't necessarily because this is what I would have done. It was maybe a crossover between this is what I would have done and this is how they think because I've studied them.
Yeah. I think it's more generalizations rather than if it was me. But yeah, he's got us to a good place in understanding the mind of serial killers, but
Goddamn indeed.
Indeed, yeah.
But he had a stroke in 2015. He's been declared mentally disabled, so.
Yeah, and he's got that Joker disease as well.
The Joker disease?
Pseudo-bulbar disorder. So he just starts laughing or crying.
Oh, really?
Because of the stroke.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I didn't know
that. Was that. Yeah, no, that was one of the things that was in his parole hearing. So he had a stroke in 2015, and he now just starts crying or laughing at any given point. I just thought it was funny because it's Joker disease.
Yeah, I thought you meant like he was prone to writing messages on mirrors in lipstick. He's just going around jail in general, just writing, put on a happy face in all the mirrors, just to cheer people up. But yeah, that was the co-ed killer, Ed Kemper.
Indeed, and he was a right one. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Truly appreciate all the support, all the views, all the listens that we've had. Overwhelmed by it, frankly. But thank you all so much. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.